What most people misunderstand about trauma-born empath loners is that they are not broken. They are not antisocial. They are not cold, distant, or difficult. They are something far more rare and far more dangerous to mishandle. These are people who were forced to feel everything from the very beginning, not because they chose sensitivity as a personality trait, but because their nervous system learned at a young age that reading the room was survival, detecting a shift in someone's mood before it became a threat, absorbing the emotional weight in a space before anyone else even noticed there was weight to carry. They didn't develop empathy. They were trained into it by pain. And here is where most people make the fatal mistake. They see someone who understands them deeply, who listens without judgment, who seems to know them, and they think, finally, someone's safe. Finally, someone I can pour everything into. And so they do. They pour and pour and pour, but what they never stop to ask is who has ever poured into this person. The trauma-born empath loner carries a wound that most people never see because these individuals became experts at concealment before they could ride a bike. They learned that their pain made others uncomfortable. They learned that needing too much drove people away, so they sealed it, quietly, completely. And they kept showing up for everyone else not out of weakness, but because giving felt safer than receiving. Helping felt safer than being helped. And then one day without warning they disappear, not dramatically, not with a goodbye. They simply go quiet. They stop answering. They retreat into solitude so completely that people who thought they knew them are left asking, what happened? The answer is simple and devastating. They ran out. They gave until the well was dry, and nobody noticed because they were too good at pretending the well was never empty. Only 1% of people in their lives ever truly survive this dynamic, meaning only 1% ever earn the real trust, the real presence, the real version of who this person is beneath all the armor. The other 99% only ever met the function of this person, the listener, the helper, the one who always seemed fine. If you are one of these people, or if you love one, what comes next will change how you see everything. When a child grows up in an environment where love is unpredictable, where the atmosphere in the house can shift from calm to dangerous without warning, something profound happens inside their brain. Not metaphorically, literally. The architecture of the brain begins to change, and it changes in a very specific direction. The brain has one primary job, not happiness, not success, survival. And when a child's survival depends on reading the emotional state of the adults around them, the brain becomes extraordinarily good at exactly that. It starts allocating more resources to the parts responsible for detecting threat, reading faces, sensing. Shifts in tone and energy. The nervous system goes on permanent alert. It learns to scan, constantly, automatically, without being asked. This is not a gift they were born with. This is a skill their pain built for them. There is a part of the brain called the amygdala. Think of it as the alarm system. In most people, it fires when there is genuine danger. In a child raised in emotional chaos, that alarm system gets recalibrated. It becomes hypersensitive. It starts firing at subtle things, a slight change in someone's breathing, a pause that lasted a second too long, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Most people walk past those signals without noticing. The trauma-born empath catches every single one. And because they caught those signals, and because responding to those signals kept them safe, or at least safer, the brain reinforces that behavior. It says, this works, do more of this. So they do. They become, over time, some of the most perceptive human beings on the planet. They can walk into a room and feel the emotional temperature before a single word is spoken. They can sense when someone is lying, even when the lie is perfectly constructed. They know when someone is hurting, even when that person is performing happiness with precision. People around them experience this and feel seen, genuinely seen perhaps for the first time. And that feeling is magnetic. They are drawn in. They open up. They trust quickly, sometimes too quickly, because being understood at that level feels like finding water after years in a desert. But here is what nobody tells you about this kind of empathy. It has no off switch. The person experiencing the world this way cannot simply decide to stop absorbing. They cannot choose to feel less. Every conversation costs them something. Every emotional exchange leaves a residue. They carry what other people process and release. They go home with everyone else's weight still sitting in their chest, and because they were never taught that their own emotional needs were valid, they rarely set it down. They just carry it quietly into the next day. And because this pattern started in childhood, because they learned early that expressing their own pain created problems, caused conflict, made people leave, they became masters of containment. They look fine. They sound fine. They will convince you they are fine with a level of skill that took years of practice to develop. The very intelligence that makes them perceptive about others becomes the tool they use to hide themselves from the world. What makes this particularly important to understand is that this is not a choice they are making consciously. They are not being deliberately secretive. They are operating from the deepest programming they have, programming that was written before they had any say in the matter, written in the language of survival, in the years when being too much meant being abandoned. So when you meet someone who understands you with unusual depth, who feels almost supernatural in their awareness of who you are before you lean in and let yourself be held by that, ask yourself one question. Have you ever stopped long enough to ask them how they are and actually waited for the real answer? Because behind the most perceptive person in the room is a child who learned that feeling everything was the only way to stay safe, and nobody ever made them feel safe enough to stop. When a child learns to survive, by feeling everything, they become an adult who gives everything, and nobody around them ever quite realizes the cost. The trauma-born empath loner is, on the surface, one of the most generous human beings you will ever encounter. They listen in a way that makes you feel like the only person on earth. They notice when something is off with you before you have named it yourself. They show up consistently, quietly, without needing to be asked. And because they do this so naturally, effortlessly in appearance, the people around them begin to operate under a silent and dangerous assumption that this person is simply built differently, that they are fine, that they do not need what everyone else needs. That assumption is where the damage begins. What people never see is what happens after. After the long conversation where they held space for your crisis. After the moment where they set aside whatever they were carrying to focus entirely on you. They go home or they close the door, or they sit alone in their car and they exhale something heavy, something they have been holding the entire time. Because while they were present with you, they were also present with themselves, feeling their own weight alongside yours, absorbing not just your words, but your energy, your pain, your unresolved emotion, and they took all of it in without filtering because that is the only way they know how to connect. They never learned to give partially. For them, it has always been everything or nothing. And the cruel irony is this: the more someone appreciates them, the more they give. Gratitude does not signal to them that they can rest. It signals that the connection is real, that this person values them, and so they give more. They invest more. They pour more of themselves into making sure that person feels supported, understood, cared for. Their love language, if you want to call it that, is relentless presence. And they extend it even when they are running on empty, because somewhere deep inside, they still believe that the moment they stop giving is the moment people will stop staying. That belief is not irrational. It was taught to them. In a home where love was conditional, where attention had to be earned, where being useful meant being kept, they learned that their value was tied to what they could provide, not who they were, what they could do, what they could carry, what they could absorb so that others did not have to. Decades later, that lesson still runs in the background, invisible, automatic, so they keep giving to friends who call only in crisis, to partners who have learned to lean without ever thinking to lift, to colleagues, to strangers, sometimes even to people who have given them clear evidence they do not deserve it, because saying no feels like abandonment. And abandonment to a nervous system shaped by early loss does not feel like disappointment. It feels like danger. What this creates over time is an exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, a kind of depletion that goes all the way down to the identity level. They begin to lose track of where their emotions end and someone else's begin. They wake up tired. They move through their days doing everything right for everyone else and cannot explain why they feel so hollow. so invisible, so completely alone in a life that from the outside looks full. And because they are who they are, perceptive, composed, unwilling to burden others, they will not tell you any. Of this, they will ask how you are doing instead. The most quietly exhausted people in the world are often the ones everyone relies on most, and the tragedy is not that they give too much. The tragedy is that they were never shown that they were worth receiving. There is a moment that happens with every trauma-born empath loner. It does not announce itself. There is no argument that crosses a clear line, no single event you can point to and say, that was it, that was the moment everything changed. It is quieter than that, more gradual. And by the time the people around them notice something is wrong, it has already been over for a long time. This is what the disappearing act actually looks like. It starts with a small internal shift, a moment where they give, and something inside them registers almost imperceptibly that nothing came back. Not a dramatic betrayal, not cruelty, just absence. A response that was slightly too shallow. A moment where they were vulnerable, barely, almost invisibly, and the person on the other side did not catch it, did not notice. Moved on too quickly. And the trauma-born empath who notices everything noticed that too. They file it away. They do not react. They do not say anything. They continue showing up, continue giving, continue being everything everyone needs them to be. But something has shifted beneath the surface. A quiet internal accounting has begun, and they are keeping score not out of resentment, not consciously, but out of self-protection. The same instinct that kept them safe as a child is now watching, measuring, calculating how much longer it is safe to stay open. And then it happens again and again, each time smaller than the last, each time more invisible to everyone except them, until one day they go quiet, not loudly. They do not slam doors or send long messages explaining their pain. They simply become less available. They take longer to respond. Their replies get shorter. The warmth that was always present starts to feel slightly more distant, slightly more managed. Most people around them do not even notice at first, because the trauma-born empath is so skilled at maintaining the appearance of connection that even their withdrawal looks, on the surface, like a slightly off week. But inside, the doors are closing, one by one, carefully, completely. This is not manipulation. This is not punishing anyone. This is the only form of self-defense they ever learned. When the environment stopped, being safe in childhood, they could not leave physically. So they learned to leave internally, to stay in the room while removing themselves from it entirely, to be present in body while retreating somewhere no one could reach them. That skill, built for survival, now activates automatically whenever the emotional environment starts to feel like too much. And here is what makes this so devastating for everyone involved. By the time the people in their life realize something is wrong, the trauma-born empath has already grieved the relationship, privately, completely, while still showing up, while still being kind, while still performing normalcy with the same skill they have always had. They grieve quietly and they grieve alone because that is the only way they have ever known how to process loss in silence, in solitude, without burdening anyone with the weight of their own pain. So when they finally go fully silent, when the messages stop and the presence disappears, and they seem to have vanished without explanation, they are not leaving in that moment. They left months ago. What you are witnessing is simply the moment they stopped pretending they had not. And the hardest part, the part that stays with the people left behind, is that they often cannot identify what went wrong, because nothing went dramatically wrong. Everything went quietly, gradually, invisibly wrong, in all the small moments nobody thought to pay attention to. They did not leave because they stopped caring. They left because they cared so deeply for so long in such complete silence that staying finally cost more than they had left to give. There is a moment, and almost everyone who has been close to a trauma-born empath loner has lived this moment, where you realize they are pulling back. They go quieter than usual. Their responses get shorter. The warmth that used to pour out of them naturally starts to feel measured, careful, like they are deciding word by word how much of themselves to give you. Most people panic at this point. They push harder. They ask what's wrong. They get frustrated or clingy or cold. And the empath watches all of this happening, feels every bit of it, and goes even more silent, not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. Here is what most people never see. By the time an empath loner starts pulling back, they have already been giving for a very long time. Long before you noticed. Long before there was any visible sign. They were absorbing your stress when you didn't ask them to. They were carrying the emotional weight of the room while you thought everything was fine. They were managing your moods, softening your sharp edges, and building a safe space around you quietly, invisibly. The way they learned to do as children because it was the only way they knew how to love. And they did it without asking for anything in return. Not because they didn't need anything, but because asking felt dangerous. Somewhere in their past, needing something got them hurt, so they became experts at not needing, experts at giving, experts at making everyone around them feel seen, held, and understood while they sat alone inside themselves, unseen. This is the dynamic that plays out almost every time in almost every relationship. People are drawn to these individuals for a reason they often can't explain. There is a gravity to them, a depth. Being around them feels different, like someone is actually paying attention to you for the first time, and that feeling is addictive, so people take more, unconsciously, naturally. They start to lean in harder. They bring their problems, their fears, their darkest thoughts because this person can hold it, because this person never seems overwhelmed, because this person always seems to know the right thing to say. What they don't realize is that on the other side of that calm exterior is a nervous system that is working overtime. A person who goes home and sits in silence for hours just to recover from a single conversation. A person who lies awake at night still feeling the emotional residue of everyone they interacted with that day. And still, they show up. They answer the call. They sit with you in your pain. They give again. Until one day they don't. Not because they stopped caring. Caring is not something they can turn off, and that is one of the most painful parts of being who they are. They disappear because they have reached the edge of what a human being can carry alone. They disappear because no one ever thought to ask how they were doing, really doing, not as the strong one, not as the listener, but as a person who is also tired, also scared, also quietly falling apart. The cruelest part of this pattern is that most people only notice the empath when they are gone. Only then does the absence hit. Only then do people start asking questions, replaying moments, wondering what they missed. And they missed everything because they were never taught to look. This is not about blame. Most people do not drain an empath on purpose. They do it because they never had to think about it. The empath made it too easy to take and too comfortable to stay unaware. But unawareness is not innocence, and silence is not peace. When the empath finally disappears, they are not punishing you, they are finally choosing themselves, possibly for the first time in their life. There is a version of love that most people have never experienced, not because they are incapable of it, but because they have never been required to grow into it. They have never met someone who demanded that level of presence, that level of honesty, that level of genuine self-awareness just to remain in the room with them. A trauma-born empath loner does not need a perfect person. They do not need someone who has everything figured out. What they need, what they are almost desperate for, even if they would never say it out loud, is someone who is real. Someone who shows up as they actually are, not as who they think they should be, because the empath will feel the difference immediately. They always do. And the moment they sense performance instead of presence, they begin the quiet process of letting go. This is the first thing the 1% understand. You cannot fake your way through a relationship with this person. Every mask you wear, they see through not because they are trying to catch you, but because reading beneath the surface is as natural to them as breathing. They are not judging you for the mask. They are waiting, sometimes hoping that you will take it off yourself. And if you never do, they will grieve the version of you they believed was underneath it, and they will leave. The 1% are also people who have done their own work, not perfectly, not completely. But they have looked at themselves honestly enough to know where they are still wounded, where they are still reactive, where they still have the tendency to take more than they give. That self-awareness is not optional with an empath loner. It is the entrance fee. Because they cannot be with someone who makes them responsible for emotions that person refuses to own. They have spent their entire life absorbing what others would not carry. They will not do it inside a relationship they chose freely. What also separates the 1% is how they respond to the empath's silence. When this person goes quiet, and they will go quiet, they will need to retreat, they will need space. That feels uncomfortable to someone who doesn't understand the 1% do not chase in panic, and they do not withdraw in punishment. They hold steady. They communicate without pressure. They say simply and honestly, "I'm here when you're ready," and they mean it. That kind of steadiness is rare. And to an empath loner who has spent their whole life waiting for someone who does not collapse or combust when things get emotionally complex, that steadiness feels like arriving somewhere safe for the very first time. The 1% also receive well. This sounds simple. It is not. An empath loner who finally trusts someone will love them in ways that feel almost overwhelming, with an attentiveness, a depth of understanding, and emotional generosity that most people have never been on the receiving end of. And many people, when they encounter that level of love, panic. They feel unworthy. They self-sabotage. They pull away from the very thing they said they wanted. The 1% stay open. They let themselves be loved without turning it into a test or a threat. They receive it as the rare and deliberate gift that it is. And finally, the 1% never stop being curious about this person. They understand that a trauma-born empath loner contains more interior life than most people will ever be willing to explore. They ask questions. They listen beyond the words. They notice the small things, because with this person, the small things are never small. To survive a relationship with a trauma-born empath loner is not about being strong enough to handle them. It is about being brave enough to finally handle yourself.